Thanks for everyone for tuning in for my meet over lunch. As Natalie said, I'm Hall W. Rockefeller. I'm the founder and director of Less Than Half. I'm going to try to share my screen with you so that we can, here we go. Let's see. So we can have some visuals, because when talking about art, it doesn't make much sense not to show you art. So before I dive into my latest project and the reason for my coming on your screen this afternoon, I just wanted to talk about Less Than Half itself, and what its origins are, and sort of a little bit about its philosophy. So I started the website in 2017 as a blog, as just a way of exercising my art writing muscles after I finished my master's program in art history. The site contains reviews of gallery and museum shows featuring the work of female artists in New York City, as well as profiles of practicing New York-based artists. So here are the three latest. Tatiana Rocha, Virginia Lee Montgomery, and Paola Martinez Fitere, who is, all of whom I admire a lot and have got to meet and talk to. Met them all in person pre-pandemic, so I'm definitely missing the in-person studio visit. But as many people have been doing, you have to be adaptable. So I have tried to figure out ways in which to continue the ethos of the project, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. So these days I am writing for the website, but also for various other publications exclusively on the subject of female artists. I also give talks and lectures on individual artists or sort of themes in art history pertaining to female artists. And then also in December of 2019, I launched a newsletter, subscription monthly newsletter, sort of recognizing that maybe, the traditional modes of media are not how people really like to consume and naturally consume information as we start migrating to our phones more. So it's sort of a monthly, as if you were getting a magazine, but in your inbox. And that features, different recommendations for books or movies or exhibitions. And my favorite part of it actually is that each month I commission a female artist to do the illustrations for it. So there's a bit of sort of original content in there as well. And being able to find emerging artists and contact them and tell them about the project and and support them, financially is really, really, however modestly, really, really satisfying to me. And just, one more, I want to be involved in the arts from, the very smallest, newest artists to, people who've been working for decades. But while the reasons for writing exclusively about female artists, I hope, are self-evident, and that women need and deserve to be represented equally, I'm always aware of the why beyond that basic insistence on fairness. I believe that art is the highest form of human expression, and then if we limit that expression from a significant portion of our population, we are actually denying something human. In turn, it's actually easier to oppress those groups of people that we don't see as equal in intellectual or creative ways. I'm not saying here that I think that writing about women is going to solve problems like equal pay and access to reproductive rights, but I do believe that there's a holistic valuing of life, of women's lives, and writing about art is one of those ways to get to a point where women are, that we naturally want to give women the rights that they deserve. So, I hope I'm doing my small part to get to a point where that's the reality. So this actually brings me to the 50 Women Project. as it centered around the same values, that we should not dismiss artistic expression based on factors that are external to the talent of the artist. You know, in the case of Less Than Half, gender, and then in the case of the 50 Women Project, geography as well as gender. There's my logos. So the 50 Women Project. In 2019, I received a grant to interview female artists who were not based in New York. I did 2 separate trips to do in-person on-site studio visits with people in the Bay Area and Northern California, and then also the Rust Belt. So I interviewed artists in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Cleveland, and then just a little bit outside of Cleveland. So after completing these interviews on site, I was sort of at a loss at what to do with the profiles that I wrote. I didn't really want to place them in, you know, sort of more mainstream art publications because I thought they might sort of slip through the cracks without the proper sort of framing. And then I also didn't want to put them on my website because I thought that might confuse my readers to all of a sudden be, you know, faced with, you know, something that was outside of my scope, which was New York City. And then that would also sort of, you know, bury the stories and not give them the attention that they deserved. I ended up sort of sitting on them for quite a while, for a year. But I'm luckily a firm believer that if you just wait, the timing will sort of align, and you just have to be patient. And while I by no means predicted this pandemic, I was certainly ready to start a new project when it rolled around, especially a project that did not require that I be in New York City, because one, I actually wasn't in New York City. I had just moved out to New Jersey pretty much right as the pandemic started. And 2, I mean, as we all know, everything is closed, including galleries. And the idea of being in an enclosed studio with another artist was definitely out of the question. So born out of this isolation due to COVID-19, the 50 Women Project is a virtual journey across the country to meet American women artists who are working and living outside of the all-consuming vortex of New York City's art world, which as of late has closed its doors to visitors. But what is the art world if it exists only on the internet? Why should we continue to abide by the exclusions geography incurs when our worlds have simultaneously shrunk to the size of our apartments, all the while expanding to the size of the internet? What have we been missing by keeping our attention on a handful of cities? Well, as it turns out, in my past couple months of interviewing female artists, it turns out that we've actually been missing quite a lot by only thinking and writing about artists who work in New York and LA. So with that said, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to 2 of the many women that I have met over the course of this project, whose work simply would not have come to be if they had lived in places other than where they are living. So here are a couple of artists. Okay, Julia Christensen, who is a professor of new media at Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, who's actually one of the artists that I met in person last year. So in driving around northeastern Ohio, where the artist lives, Julia Christensen started thinking about the factories and the machinery that the region has famously had less and less use for as industrial jobs go overseas. So she was, you know, passing buildings of old factory buildings and wondering what happens to these machines. Are they thrown in a landfill? Are they recycled? If they are recycled, what happens to them? Where do they go? This thought actually led Christensen around the world to an e-waste facility in India, where a lot of these machines and the parts had been sort of refashioned. And it even led her into outer space as she began a collaboration with NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab to help their engineers design a spaceship that could withstand a 200-year journey through the galaxy. This is real. This is an artist collaborating with scientists and being of real help to them, which is something that, you know, I think a lot of times we like to think that art and science, artists can design something to help scientists, but it never really works fully. This is a moment where I think Julia's mind is actually helping scientists reconceive structures and designs and just sort of the purpose of certain space ships. So when talking to her, I was just absolutely blown away by this, because I had never met someone who had worked with NASA scientists. So in her latest book, Upgrade Available, which you see here, which actually just came out in May, I believe, she outlines ways in which obsolescence exists on different timescales, from the 3 to 5 years that my laptop is designed to last, to the 70 plus years of human life exists, to the timescale of institutions, which is much longer, and then all the way out to the timescales of space. How certain things exist in space, and how human objects can exist in space. And all this came from a simple drive across the Ohio countryside. So I don't think if Julia Christensen had been on the 6 train in Manhattan, these ideas would have come to her in such a vivid and actionable way. So my next artist, Natalie Ball, who you see right here at the bottom right hand side, is an absolutely fantastic artist who I've actually been admiring for years. So I'm so happy this project has given me an opportunity to actually connect to her. I had wanted to interview her for a while, but she wasn't New York based, so never really had the opportunity. So here she is. I've gotten to talk to her. She's as fascinating as I thought she would be. So here, mixed media artist Natalie Ball lives with her children on her ancestral land in Southern Oregon. She's half Black and half Indigenous, and a citizen of the Modoc tribe, which is located in Southern Oregon and Northern California. She grew up in Portland, Oregon, but found that the city was too gentrified when she returned home from graduate school. So by moving onto her tribe's land, a world of material, both physical, emotional, and historical, this world opened up to her, and all of which she employs in her work. She takes advantage of the skills, knowledge, and materials of those around her to make these large-scale assemblages, which are portraits of a multicultural America in which she lives, as well as historical reckonings with the federal government's treatment of our Native populations. I find her work to be absolutely stunning, very unlike work I've seen before, and I do believe it's because she has such a close connection with her family, with her ancestral land. Talking to her, it was very clear that so much of the sourcing of her materials is a very passive thing, because she is just so enmeshed in that world. She talks about quilting and learning to quilt in the traditional Lakota star quilt from her family members, and finding things. She even talked about finding a old book of ancestral stories that had been written down, passed down, photocopied in a binder behind a bookshelf in her house that she had no idea was there. So again, these things aren't happening in other places. They're very sort of specific to the places these artists are in, and I feel so privileged that I've been able to talk to these women. By focusing this project on both women and people who live outside of New York City, this project is at its core about recognizing the ways in which systems, whether patriarchal or geographical, obscure the work of equally well-trained, talented, and thought-provoking artists. It would be an error on my part not to further that mission within the confines of my project. That is, the 50 Women Project will lift the voices of those who find further opposition to their success because of additional systems of oppression, like race, religion, or sexual orientation. In my wider work, just writing for less than half, I spend a lot of my time counting. I count how many women certain galleries represent. I count how many retrospectives museums are giving to women. So I knew that to hold myself to a certain standard, I also had to count. And after all, 50, I have a certain amount, I have a, number there, so I can easily set sort of goals for myself. And I know that counting can feel a little clinical sometimes. It can feel like you're filling quotas. And I really want to stress that I think counting is actually a very important way to counteract the sort of nefarious ways that systematic forms of oppression are presented to us. I think I'm often reading, a list of artists, and I'll come across a couple women's names, and I will, by the end of the list, think that, oh, this is a great proportion. This is, this gallery or this museum has really, made an effort to include women. And then you end up counting, and it actually ends up being, grossly out of proportion. So you have 30% women being represented and 70% men, and you realize that there are ways that your brain is functioning, whether it's placing outsized significance on women because you want it so badly for them to be equal. So I find that the great way to do this is count, and then you have no doubt that things are fair. And unfortunately, we're in a point in all battles to create equality and inclusion where we're still early enough that we really need to be paying attention. We can't, I think, anytime that we sit back and are passive about things, the status quo creeps in. So these numbers on the left reflect the baseline of what would be fair for representation, but less than half has never been in the business of doing just the bare minimum. So I'm hoping actually to reach 56% representation of women of color by the end of the project. And of course, the current moment, the protests and increased calls to directly address the ways in which systems have been designed to oppress Black populations in the United States, whereas these have made an impact on me as I consider what my project means. As a result, I have folded this message into my platform, as I don't think the two are separable. It would be hypocritical to argue that to exclude women from the canon is to deny them the right to assert their humanity, and then turn around and do just that to female artists of color. And I know there's precedent for this. Feminist movements have historically advanced the rights of white women at the expense of Black women and women of color. And I know that is just has to come to an end for feminism to really be successful in what it purports to be to desire. So I'm thinking long and hard about that, and I hope that I can reach these numbers, and I see no reason why I can't, because I really think it's a matter of doing research, and I've so far loved doing research, and I've loved discovering voices that I wouldn't have otherwise. So really, this is the point of the project. So actually, in addition to the long form profiles that are on the site, I have shifted my Instagram account to feature a different set of non-New York City-based female artists. So I'll have 50 on the site, and then 50 or more on my Instagram. So far, I've featured 30 women from across the country. And of course, this research, again, has been eye-opening. I'm also heartened to discover so many institutions that exist across the country, whether galleries that feature the work of female artists, like Women and Their Work in Austin, Texas, or Woman Made Gallery in Chicago, to the Kentucky Foundation for Women, which is heavily arts focused and gives out grants to women in the performing arts and the visual arts. So that all has, just painted a richer portrait of this country, and shifted my sights in a way that has that I'm confident will inform the rest of my practice, whether I'm writing about women in New York or otherwise. So I'm thinking about, let's see. So I'm thinking about the future of the project, and I'm hoping to have, what I really want to do is have experts in different regions. For example, maybe it's the head of a residency program or the head of a prominent museum in a region to write a little paragraph of what the sort of environment is like, what the history of art making in the region is like, what what people find inspiration in, where people exhibit their work, what the sort of major influences are, and have that person who knows sort of the environment write a sort of small paragraph to head the article about the women of that region, because I want to be able to create this sort of holistic picture so that people aren't looking at an artist as sort of a one-off, sort of floating without any sort of foundation. I want people to read about these women, understand how they fit in, and understand how they're significant. There's a lot of work that goes into this, so I don't want to put in, this work and have it do nothing for the artists. Luckily, I'm very actually excited. I featured an artist on my Instagram, and a gallerist friend of mine said to me that he was considering actually asking her if she wanted to do a show in New York City. So I'm really hoping that happens. I know in the time of the pandemic, things are a little, precarious, but that would be such a win. I think it would be, that's why I'm doing this, to get exposure for women who I think are enormously talented and deserve a bigger platform. So this is sort of a conclusion of my talk. I wanted to sort of mine the brains of everyone who's here. I am always looking for more recommendations. I'm always looking to sort of tap into other people's networks. So these are the regions of the country that I'm writing about. I've already interviewed people in italics, and then Chicago and the Southwest, I've got some people I'm in conversations with. But if you have any recommendations for artists in any of these regions, I would absolutely love to hear from you. I'll put my email in the chat. And then this is this week. If you want to check out the website, I'm posting about these three women. Natalie Ball is here, who I mentioned previously, whose work I find just so fantastic. And then I'll put my email in the chat if you have any recommendations, or you can simply, say them right now. I'd be happy to hear them. And then if you're interested in hearing more about female artists, you can also head to my website and sign up for my newsletter or for updates, or just put your email in the chat now and I can sign you up. But thank you so much to RU for having me. Thank you so much for everyone here for listening. I encourage everyone, when things open back up, to go to museums and galleries and show the world that the voices of female artists matter.